What caused you to come up with the idea that you and I guess Ray hatched together of having a trust bank, what you call the trust bank? You coined the term, I believe.
Yeah, I think I did coin that term years ago, where this trust bank would be akin to building up deposits of goodwill in case you needed it later on. And I think that it was sort of confounded people in those days because McDonald's was such a small company selling 15-cent hamburgers, and getting involved in the community was not exactly the kind of thing that you expected them to do. It was more expected of banks and major companies like, utilities and things like that, who got really involved in the community.
Was this a tough thing to sell to the franchisees, or the organization support this idea right from the beginning?
Well, it was kind of an easy sell in that sense because Ray Kroc had a very big interest in public relations. He had a flair for it, if you will. He was one of the, he was sort of a public relations person's dream. If you told him he had to go to Muncie, Indiana for an interview, he'd say, okay, what time do we leave? Because he had a great feeling for it. So sometimes you can have, great ideas for clients, but if they're not receptive, it doesn't mean anything. But he was always receptive from day one. He just felt good about it. And I think he came from a theatrical background. He was a musician, and he ran a radio station for a while in Chicago in the early days. Hired Amos and Andy as with their first jobs, and so he had this kind of flair for it. So I think he was an easy sell in that, from that standpoint.
Did he have at that time, or did McDonald's have at that time, any kind of a internal public relations staff?
No.
You were the sole.
No, we were the inside and the outside, if you will, because they really are so small they couldn't have any of those things. I started to say earlier, maybe in my talk about how we got started, there was a man named Sonneborn who was Croc's partner, who was the financial guy with the company. Ray was sort of the Mr. Salesman, if you will, but Sonneborn was the financial brains behind the company and the man who came up with the real estate concept, which really made sense for them. And Sonneborn hated the idea that Ray Kroc hired us because when Ray brought him in that morning, when I came over to his office, he hit the ceiling and said, what are you hiring a public relations firm for? You and I can't even afford to draw salaries. So for the first couple of years, I ducked every time I saw Sonneborn. I didn't want to remind him of the $500 a month he was spending.
When did the idea of the Ronald McDonald houses, and how did that come about?
Well, the Ronald McDonald House program started in Philadelphia about 30 years ago. The local McDonald's franchisees were approached by the Philadelphia Eagles football team. The Eagles had a player whose daughter had leukemia, and the player told everybody what a hard time it was for families of seriously ill children because they had no place to stay around the hospitals. And a lot of them couldn't afford to stay in hotels. So that whole concept of building a house near a major children's hospital where parents and the children themselves could stay while they were being treated came about. So it started there, and then the local franchisees around St. Patrick's Day decided to devote the proceeds of Shamrock shakes, milkshakes, to be devoted to building this house. And sales were so good that the house was built in a very short period of time. So I went to go look at this house when it first opened, and I thought it was such a good idea that I recommended to the company that they expand the idea, and you could open these houses, I thought, in almost every major city. So while I certainly can't take credit for creating the concept, which I didn't do, but I did recommend that they go national, and never dreaming it would be even international. They would open in Moscow and Tokyo and Stockholm and Brazil and wherever. But that's how the whole concept started.
Did you equate this with being part of the trust bank and taking something out, or was there a relationship that you saw between the two?
Oh, absolutely. I thought it was a natural for, I think, and still to this day, I think clients will come to us and say, well, give us a Ronald McDonald House idea. And those things are not easy to come by. It would be very easy if you could manufacture this thing. But it absolutely fit the bill as far as the statement about their involvement in the community, because it was so important for McDonald's to become part and parcel of the local community. And what better way to illustrate that, by having your name on the door, if you will, too, of all these houses. So it really has been a very heartwarming experience in many ways.
In recent years, Golin Harris has become well known for having created the idea of a trust index, the Golin Harris Trust Index, which is now a measure of some form of corporate social responsibility. What's the connection between the Ronald McDonald Houses, McDonald's, and you're coming up with that idea?
Well, the word trust has always been part and parcel of our credo at Golin Harris, even before it became fashionable. Now today, everybody seems to be talking about the word, which is great, but because I think they realize that without trust, a lot of these major companies would be in trouble. And the whole trust index was something that we came up with some research on in testing what the index was as far as trust is concerned with some of the major companies in the country. And we've even expanded it to go to Asia and Europe as well. So we try to come up with this index to see how well a company is doing in terms of its trust quotient, if you will.
How broad, when you use the term trust, how broad are the issues that you cover as far as what constitutes trust?
Well,
if I've explained it in some meaningful way.
Well, trust is so important, I think. It's so important in everything we do in terms of business or in our personal lives, because without it, you can't really function. And it even caused me to write a book about it a couple of years ago, because we use the word trust. And then when the Enrons and the WorldComs came about with all the scandals of the first part of this century, somebody came to me and said, well, why don't you do a book on the subject, because you've always talked about trust. So somebody contacted me, an agent called me, and like a lot of things in life, I didn't react until I had a deadline. So when they committed to do the book, then I had to sit down and figure out how to do it.
Well, I think that your book, Trust and Consequences, has actually become one of the best books on the subject that has been written and is now available for people both in corporations and agencies to really get a sense of what the issues are. And I wonder if you would just describe, for the purposes of this activity, what some of the big issues are that you feel that corporations and agencies face that relate to trust.
Well, for example, I interviewed some CEOs of some of the major companies that I admired and wanted to get their feelings on it. And one of them was a man named Ralph Larson, who was the former CEO of Johnson & Johnson, because I had heard he coined a term called a trust mark. I almost got mixed up with my trust bank. But and I always thought that was a great term. So when I called him about it, and he spent a long time on the phone with me being interviewed, and he said he thought that he always told his people at Johnson & Johnson that you don't have a trademark in this company, you have a trust mark. And if anybody fouls that up, you have me to answer to, he said. So I was very impressed with what he talked about it, and I thought that was very interesting because it summed up almost everything you've thought of with the word trust. Everything you do as far as your ethical standards of behavior, whether you're an employee or your treatment with customers or almost everything you do is related to the word trust. Because I think if you lose the word, if you lose trust, you've really lost almost everything you have.
Do you suggest ways that companies or agencies or individuals can build trust in your book, Trust and Consequences?
Well, I think that you, whether you're an employee or whether you're treating your suppliers or your ultimate customers, you have to keep the word trust in mind with everything you do. So I don't think it's a matter of one single thing, and it's not a quick fix. It's a long-term process where you have to build up these deposits, if you will, in this trust bank, so that it does make some sense to, if a company does have a problem or a crisis, the public or your employees would not think ill of you and would think that you're not the kind of company that would violate that trust.
Is trust or having a reputation for trust solely dependent on the CEO and the CEO's involvement?
No, no, I think the CEO sets the tone, and the CEO is very important for setting the tone for the trust, but I think it has to be carried out in every department of a company.
So in other words, a company could have a reputation for being trusted or a positive, let's say like an Enron could have had, but the CEO actually, the actions did them in.
Well, I think
Is that a fair?
well, I think in that case it was not just the CEO. I think, but he must have set a tone in that company where all the others didn't think of the word trust. I think they violated it almost in every step of the way because they were taking shortcuts and things of that nature. I think you'll find that a lot of the newer companies, now this is a generalization and I may not be completely accurate, but a lot of the newer companies have been taking shortcuts because they have so much pressure on them sometimes to come up with the right earnings quarter after quarter. So they'll do things that aren't quite ethical. And in doing so, they've really destroyed the reputation of that company forever. And I think that's a case in point at Enron.
Al, is there an opportunity here, or what are the opportunities for the person in public relations or corporate communications to have an impact on a CEO's behavior in a situation like that?
Well, I think that a public relations person has a great chance to have a strong influence if he or she has the credibility within that organization. And I think sometimes therein lies the problem, that some public relations people are not taken seriously by their top management. And that's a danger because the CEO may say, well, that's very nice to hear, but what has that got to do with the mainstream of our business? So I think that the average public relations officer of a company, or anybody within departments for that matter, has to gain the credibility of top management, or else they're not going to be effective. They'll go through the motions, but they won't have any influence at all that they really need to have in a time, such as giving advice to a top CEO.
Now you're talking about a very significant thing from a public relations standpoint, and that's the ability of a person in the practice of public relations to develop credibility. What characteristics does someone have to have that kind of a reputation where their advice is going to be welcome and followed?
Well, I think a public relations person in an organization has to really prove that they deserve the credibility by knowing the company as well as anybody else in that company. They can't just know their own particular phase of the business. If it's a company that has distribution as part of their business, they have to know what all the nuances are of that distribution system, and they have to know everything about sales and manufacturing and things of that nature. because they'll never be taken seriously if they keep themselves isolated to think that they only want to concern themselves with what they do on a day-to-day basis.
What I hear you saying, that for a public relations person to be effective is that they have to know more than just the discipline of public relations. They really have to have a broad knowledge about the company or the organization that they work for. Is that fair?
No, that's very fair. I think that's been something that I've talked about for a long time, because I think it's critical to the success of our whole industry. We want to be taken seriously. We want to be considered as part of top management of companies and of counselors, in our case, who might represent these companies. So we have to know the companies as well as they know themselves.
Do you see branding as a part of advertising or public relations? How do you see the subject of branding these days?
Well, I think somebody I know who was a great marketing guy said to me that without trust, a brand is nothing. So I think that public relations builds trust in a brand, and that's a very important thing. And you can buy a lot of advertising if you're Coca-Cola, but it won't necessarily make it a trusted brand if you don't do certain things to complement that sort of thing. So I think that in our business we have to be very conscious of brand, and I don't think there are a lot of purists in our business too who say we should not have anything to do with marketing or brands or things of that nature. Well, I've never believed that. I've always felt that this was a very important part of what we do. And I think if we take ourselves too seriously sometimes and worry about the word profession, I think it's a danger. I think we have to realize this is a business, and you have to think of it as a business as well as a profession, and not let the other part of it overrule the fact that it is business.
Now, I have to wrap this up, I have to say that I was more than pleased to get your calendar that had the list of some things that you had learned, or in fact there were 12 things that you had learned over the last 50 years. And I thought that was sort of an inspired list of things. What started out with trust isn't everything, it's the only thing, and had a thing that's very characteristic of you, in that if you've got it, don't flaunt it, and doing good is good for business, and don't overpromise. One of the latter, and you said selling is not a dirty word, which I think you amplified here. But one of the great things that you said wound up with was love it or leave it. And I think that you've been an example of a person who's loved what they are doing, and I think we're all fortunate and blessed that you never even considered, I think, of leaving it. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope somebody might learn a few things. And I know I enjoy doing it, and I do. I still enjoy coming to the office. I said I hate to see people who resent going, to the office on Monday mornings. They only think about Friday afternoons. I think it's great to think about Friday afternoons, but you have to look forward to Mondays too.
Right. One of the things I want to say while the camera's still rolling here is that you appreciate that everything that we've just done is going to become the property of Penn State and the Arthur Page Center in Pennsylvania at Penn State, and that you and all of us here basically have just made a wonderful contribution to the center, and that if there is any significant changes in editing or things have said that you would be notified, but basically what we've got is what we've got, and so I wanted you to know that and say that we appreciate that on behalf of the people at State College,
My pleasure.
Pennsylvania. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.